Hello and welcome once again to Radio Primavera Sound. Welcome to our Twitch stream and welcome very special guest Anthony Fantano. You feel a bit like the patron saint of Primavera Sound.
No. I don't know if I would go that far. I was about to ask, like, how special of a guest are we talking here?
How special do you feel?
I don't feel that special. I feel pretty regular.
Well, I was going to ask, because this is something that fascinates me. That does it feel a bit strange to be a very well-known music reviewer in an age where people are like, oh no one reads music reviews?
Yeah, it does. It feels weird. It feels weird every day. I feel like the only way that I'm able to sort of like just kind of like accept it as my reality is it's not. It doesn't really feel like reality most of the time because just through the internet it's all ones and zeros and just like, you know, people telling me how much I suck, like in comments, you know, which in person everybody's usually very nice. It's actually like it's actually a total 180 in person as opposed to like on the internet. On the internet it's like nothing but death threats, but in person everybody's like sweet as pie.
I mean, you say that, but you have had death threats, no? Like...
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. And I feel like when people see you on the internet, even if they're angry at you online, if they see you in person, it sort of becomes this like, oh, that's, you know, even though I was angry at that guy, oh, that's some guy like I saw on the internet. Because I've met people in person before, like, who are obviously, like, from what they tell me, like, huge fans of artists who, like, I haven't covered very positively. But, like, if they stumble across me in the mall, they're still like, hey, can I get a picture? Like, and just, like, you know, say, oh, man, my friend's not going to believe I met you. You know, it's something like that.
But on the other side, you have, like, this massive amount of fans called the Melon Army. How do you cope with them?
The Melon Army?
Yeah.
You know, it's funny to even sort of like think of it as a fandom thing. I mean, I feel like I have a very interesting audience because of the nature of what I do. I'm always critical of everything. So as a result of that, I feel like, and this is not a bad thing. I feel like they're kind of hypercritical of me and everything that I do, which I mean, it's like, I can't, after being critical for a living, I can't then turn around and just be like, you can't criticize me. Don't call me names. Don't you know, call me on my shit. You know, it's just kind of the nature of what I do. And I feel very fortunate that like I'm able to sort of like do what I do without having any kind of like anybody blowing smoke up my ass and kind of like telling me how amazing I am. You know, it's like the people just like kind of accept it and you know, the people are appreciative of the fact that they get turned on to some, you know, different kinds of music as a result of what I'm doing.
Okay, I'm going to go for the big question.
Yeah, what's the big question?
The big question. What's the point of music reviews today?
Yeah, no, I feel like the service that they should provide is mostly like curation because, I mean, it used to be back in the day, like a music review would tell you whether or not a certain record was worth your money. Because, like, you know, basically the point of access was whether or not you paid to listen to it, or maybe a friend of yours taped it or something, you know. But nowadays, like, point of access is free. You could literally listen to anything. And I feel like most people, and this is why algorithms unfortunately are doing so well now, I feel like a lot of people, music fans, are sort of like faced with a bit of like option paralysis, much in the same way that you do when you turn on Netflix or something. Mm-hmm. There's so much to listen to, and even like, and it's even overwhelming in the very narrow sort of like through way in which you're introduced to stuff on Spotify on the front page or in playlists and stuff like that. And, you know, I feel like what music reviews and what music reviewers should be doing is digging deeper for stuff that's more interesting and trying to introduce people to things that are outside of that channel, you know, and just sort of like get them to consider sort of like artists and albums that aren't necessarily, you know, being New Music Friday playlisted on, you know, Spotify or Apple Music or whatever.
I'm not going to blow smoke up your ass, but there must be albums that you have recommended that has had like a notable effect on. Like what comes to mind?
that's the point, or at least one of the points. I mean, I'm not in control of how people watch my content or consume it, and there are a lot of people who, and it's totally fine to do this, that just kind of want to, you know, get a review of an album they've already listened to from an artist they're already a fan of, and just kind of like get another perspective, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But like personally, what I get the most joy out of is when I do get that opportunity to sort of like shout out a record that I don't think is getting enough attention or getting enough of a push. And yeah, you know, I've had instances where like I've given a positive review and somebody's got signed, or I've given a positive review and all of a sudden this other kind of opportunity came down the pipe, or maybe that artist just like blew up on their own accord and maybe had a hit shortly after, and it just kind of feels like, it's confirmation of like, okay, like I saw something in them that maybe some other people didn't before.
I think for me, one of your best reviews was sort of not a review, which was Vultures.
Okay.
I thought what you did there was brave, considering the amount of feedback people get. And actually, I thought it was
a lot of death threats for that one.
But it was, for me, it struck me as absolutely spot on. Because I spent time thinking, like, how do you react to a record like that? Could you just sort of talk us through?
Yeah, I mean, for me, like, reviewing doesn't happen in a vacuum. I mean, as much as like there may be a lot of people who want me to have just reviewed that album normally as if like, everything's like regular and there's nothing kind of crazy going on. But the thing is like, I'm not just thinking of a review in terms of like, I'm going to hold myself off and like, the chamber of solitude and like think of the perfect thing to say about this record and then sort of like, arise out of it when I have that sort of like formulated. I'm thinking about not only what I'm going to say, but like what it's going to potentially mean and how it's going to be taken by the audience and what that'll sort of like ripple out as. And with the way I sort of like persistently saw Kanye kind of like poisoning the well in terms of discourse around him and his music and sort of making, it's almost like kind of Trump-like in terms of like, oh, well, any criticism leveled against me is unfair or is invalid because of this or that and the other thing. And obviously with a lot of the rhetoric he had been saying up to the point of the album and with lyrics in the album, you have a lot of like, fascist types who are, who as a result of that video were like in my comments like, oh, well, he must not have reviewed it because he's a Jew, like stuff like that. So, like when you're dealing with people like that, there's literally nothing that you could say about the album that's going to convince, those sorts of people that are going to convince angry teenagers who are weirdly fascist leaning and sort of like, see the whole world as sort of like operating against him. And that's why they must not like the album. It has nothing to do with the music. It has nothing to do with him as a person. It's because there's some kind of weird, crazy, unexplainable vendetta. It's not because he said he loves Hitler, it's for some other kind of weird third reason that like, can't be described by anybody else but him. And, I felt like kind of reviewing the album normally as if this is just a normal context just didn't really make any sense, because music doesn't exist and occur in a vacuum, like there, especially on that record, he's like saying things that have a greater meaning and sort of like, try to play off all the anti-Semitic stuff he had been saying to be like, oh, well, it's not that serious, or like, oh yeah, you really think I'm anti-Semitic? Tee hee ha ha,
there was like a horrible line. I'm not going to repeat it.
Yeah, and I mean, so it's like I'm not going to sit here and just sort of like swallow that bullshit and act like it's not happening, So yeah,
I mean, you talked about getting death threats and getting abuse, and I'm guessing you've got to be very, very thick-skinned. But like, do you care, or have you reached the point where you're just like, no, I know what I'm saying. I stick with what I'm saying. You can say what you like.
Yeah, I mean, I don't care in the sense that it's going to make me change my opinion. Like, I mean, if it's how I feel is how I feel. I'm not going to second guess it just because I got some hate on the internet. I mean, it does worry me on a personal level. Like, obviously, I want to be safe, and I don't want to fear for my life over an album review or anything like that. Like, on that level, it's always a concern, no matter how often it happens. But in terms of like it impacting what I do and sort of like my ability to sort of like look myself in the mirror knowing that I said how I actually feel and that I stuck by it, I feel like if I were to change my opinion over some negative reception that I had, the short-term benefits of that would eventually be outweighed by the long-term losses, because even if I did sort of like, please the hordes of people who are pissed at me about one single review, like long-term, everybody else who's sort of like saw that outside of that bubble, like, outside observer would be like, oh, well, how can I trust anything that he says now? Because he's just going to fold anytime people get angry at him.
As I say, I thought that review was absolutely spot on, or non-review. That response, I suppose, was absolutely spot on.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, like, it was more labeled as not a review in concept. Like in actuality, like I did actually go over some aspects of the album that I thought were weak, but simultaneously, like, again, I think a lot of Kanye's most hardcore fans at the moment are so far gone that like, how are you going to listen to any criticism I'm saying of his music when literally he's so like far down the rabbit hole of insanity that like you can't even listen to me sort of speak objective facts about the things that he's saying. Like, how am I going to expect you to take anything that I'm saying about his music subjectively? You know, because it's, as far as the music goes, it's all subjective opinion. You know, at the end of the day, like, to you, you know, big beautiful butt naked bitch don't just fall out of the sky. That could sound good to you. You know, maybe you like that. Yeah. You know, and if you do, then I guess you do. But you know, to me, like, in terms of the way he's been like kind of treating his detractors and treating, you know, conversations around fascism and racism and so on and so forth, that's kind of a bigger fish to fry.
So this is sort of one step removed, because I mean that review was obviously there was a big background to it that wasn't musical. But one thing I find quite depressing sometimes is I tend to think, like, you know, all fans of like dance music, we're in it together in a way. And I find like some of the reactions people give to like bad reviews so strong that it's just quite depressing. It's like, aren't we all in it for kind of music? Aren't we kind of all in it to have a good time?
As far as like artists or fan reactions?
Fans, I mean,
fans.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think this is necessarily a bad thing, but I mean, you know, I feel like, I guess one downside to the collective democratization of like opinions on the internet is that it does sort of like allow some fans of some artists the ability to sort of like jump into an echo chamber where they can just sort of like, if they don't want to hear the criticism of an album, that maybe there are some valid, you know, reasons that it's maybe a weaker release or something. They can all kind of hold themselves up and sort of like, you know, block themselves from any criticism and kind of like just validate each other in sort of like, you know, an echo chamber again. But I mean, as long as it doesn't sort of like, and it's certainly panned out into this, like as long as it doesn't develop into any kind of like orchestrated campaign to harass a reviewer or something, or somebody that disagrees with them. And I'm not saying that for my own personal sake, because I mean, I have kind of a platform to fire back from, you know. Yeah. I have sort of like known first and second hand reviewers who are just like up and coming younger writers who are trying to make it on their own sort of like, you know, path in music journalism, and, you know, over a negative review of a pop album, they've been doxxed, you know, over some thing that, and you know, at the end of the day, for the website that they wrote for, they may have not even decided the score, you know, which I think is another thing a lot of people don't necessarily understand.
What magazine was that didn't want to put Baile in the?
Well, I don't want to name any review or artist specifically,
I think it
but
was Pace Magazine that had to quit the byline. I mean,
there have been at least a few examples of such a thing, and you know, I hate to see that at the end of the day, because the thing is like, you know, I mean, it's not like that reviewer is like, and I mean, I think that a lot of people are outside the industry don't know, but I mean, out of all the reviewers who I've ever met, like I've never seen anybody that has like, you know, I don't know, a seething vendetta against a personal artist where, you know, they make it their entire life, you know, to sort of like hate on that person. But I don't know. I mean, I suppose like there's all kinds of people out there, but I suppose like at the end of the day, it's just a review. And I even say that in the case of my own videos, like, you know, even if a lot of people do get drawn to my opinions, just because a million people saw a video of mine doesn't mean a million people agreed with it. You know, there's a lot of videos that I have that are in that range of views where it's like, maybe it's half dislikes, you know, or it's like 2/3 dislikes, and it's just being pushed to a lot of people that don't vibe with what I'm saying at all. You know, just because a point of view is out there doesn't necessarily mean that it's like, you know, ruining the life of the artist or the livelihood of the artist that you like and that you follow. You know, as far as like, you know, if these fans are really genuinely concerned about sort of like, you know, negative impacts on the artists that they love and that they follow, like reviews are in probably the lower rung in terms of like threats to their livelihood. There's greater threats to their livelihood, be that like, you know, Ticketmaster, Live Nation, Spotify, their record label, various people on the money side of things, on the performance, you know, and booking side of things that are looking to rip them off. Like they're way huger, way bigger threats to your fave than, you know, some person reviewing their stuff and, you know, giving it a middling or a negative review.
Talking to people out there, Oxenfell, hello. Melon fans out front here. What's your favorite music publication these days?
My favorite music publication these days? Yeah. I mean, a lot of the websites and platforms that I follow these days, the editorial side of Bandcamp. I like The Quietus. I like Under the Radar. I look at quite a bit of Stereo Gum sometimes too. I follow a bit of what Complex has been doing on and off, and keep track of some stuff Pitchfork is doing too. But I mean, I've found some of those platforms harder to follow as some of them have become like bought out and hollowed out, and a lot of people have been laid off, which I'm just more and more disappointed to see every year. A lot of that I see kind of like as being in reaction to unionization efforts that are happening on those platforms. I feel like there's a lot of conversations going on a regular basis about like, what's the health of music journalism? Is it dying? Is it so on and so forth? And I feel like a lot of those conversations center around the demand, and there's like this perceived presumption that like, oh, well, it just doesn't make as much money, or there's not as much of it to go around because people don't want it anymore. And the thing is, like, I see more opinions out there than ever. Yeah, I see more opinions out there than ever. Like, obviously, like, people are putting out their opinions. There's a demand for opinions on some level. But the thing is, what's not getting discussed enough is the dog-eat-dog capitalism side that's actually destroying the music journalism industry. Because again, a lot of these websites are being hollowed out and turned into billboards by larger media companies that just want to sell ads on them and cutting as many corners as possible and just hiring less people to do either the amount of work that was being done prior or more. And, again, I see a lot of this as being in reaction to these websites trying to, or people who work for them, collectivizing to actually fight for their rights as workers. And, while I'm happy to sort of be successful at what I do, I'm sort of sad to see that side of the industry kind of threatened in that way by that.
One more question, if I may.
Yeah. As many as you want.
Well, you've had a busy day, and the last dinner party you're playing, so
they are.
So, all right, this is a debate I have with my daughter, of all people.
Oh, okay. How old's your daughter?
She's 11.
And you have music debates with your daughter?
It's sort of more basically.
I mean, that's awesome.
It's sort of more like theoretical. It's kind of musical, and it's basically like, okay, so I say to her, look, I can't ever give anything a 10 because nothing is perfect, and she says to me, Dad, you're a dick. Yeah. Basically, like, I think someone's done something really, really good. Like,
you're raising her smart.
Yeah, well, or am I? I think that's the mother's influence, basically.
Oh.
Yeah, where do you stand? Like, you give 10s,
I mean, it's rare. I've given like seven 10s out of like 3,000 reviews plus.
Discovery?
Yeah, I would probably give that a 10.
Kid
but I mean, no, probably not. Like, I'm more of an OK Computer boy, or even like an In Rainbows boy. But I feel like a 10 for me is like when I've reached a threshold of enjoyment, and I just can't really see the album being improved by anything in any way possible that would make me like it more. It's like I mean, I've listened to enough records at this point where, I mean, I have a pretty strong sense of like, I kind of wish it did that, or I wish it did this other thing, or I wish there was more of this, or I wish it didn't have that. Like, I mean, I have my preferences and I have my nitpicks, but when I really come away from an album thinking like, there's literally nothing, like I can't even conceive of a thing that would make this a better experience, I have to kind of like, I have to feel almost like my arm twisted into a 10. I have to feel like I'm like uncle, like I'm giving up. I can't even critique this. Like, it's just so beyond, like I have nothing to add to it. Like all I can really do is praise it, and there's nothing else that I could have wanted more from it. I'm just like 10. That's and it's rare that I'm there, but I can get there.
So you're siding with my daughter, right?
Yeah.
So one more thing, sorry, I know I said, what was the last album that gave you that? You're like, can't be any better, that's it.
I think the last 2 10s that I gave, it was the same year. It was Spelling's the Turning Wheel, and which is this really great art pop record, Baroque pop, art pop. It's like very mystical, it's very shishi foo-foo, like synths and harps and pianos and that sort of thing. But it's like there's some cool soul and Stevie Wonder undertones there, and there's a lot of like, lyrics surrounding like futurism and naturalism and that sort of thing. And also Lingua Ignota, Sinner Get Ready.
I love Lingua Ignota.
Oh, you're a big fan.
Yeah.
Just a mind-blowing album that dives into not only themes of abuse, but also sort of like narrativizes that in this kind of like grander story around like one's relationship with God, sort of like questioning like, you know, if God were to exist, why are these horrible things? Why did they happen? Why did they happen to me? Sort of like calling on God directly to sort of like intervene in a way at one point, in a way that's kind of like very intense. And there's a lot of on the musical side of the record, there's a lot of borrowing from, you know, old school hymns, and you know, it's this interesting kind of aesthetic combination of like noise music, drone music, Catholicism. It's a lot of layers coming together, and a very intense record.
Have you seen her live?
Yeah, I've actually caught her just under the Reverend Kristen Michael Hayter name play recently, because she's kind of taken to shifting gears with her music in general and kind of like performing more under her own name. She recently dropped a record where she kind of tooled and wrote her own kind of like series of hymn-inspired tracks that are sort of like produced in such a way where it's supposed to feel like if you had found some kind of like anthropologically, you know, sort of like recorded album where somebody like maybe found some weird Pentecostal occult like living in the Appalachians and was just like, but they record this really weird music and I'm going to record all their songs and then sort of like, you know, put it in the Smithsonian Folkways library.
Thank you so much for taking the time. That's quite, wow. And yeah, thanks for the reviews.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you. Should we change shirts now? I saw you
Yeah,
change shirts before the whole thing.
If you want, you know.
We're going to change shirts. All right.
There we go.
We're changed. We're all changed up. Okay, cool.
Great.
I'm gonna get that back after. Cool. All right, thanks, guys.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.